Hi, everyone. This is a series of talks that we are doing as an extension for our symposium on constitution of the social and its relationship with education. And in a sense, we are trying to extend whatever we are discussing there. In this regard, that we have invited Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri here to talk with us, and I am sure that you will enjoy whatever she has to say. I must do a bit of an introduction for Professor Maitrayee Chaudhuri. She has been my teacher, my mentor, my guide for a while in JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And I have learned a lot from her. She has been teaching there. She has retired recently from Center for Studies of Social System in Jawaharlal Nehru University. And she has been very phenomenal in publishing on feminism, women's studies, feminism, pedagogy, and media. We are delighted that she could join us here in talking about how the social is changing within our country and what are the possibilities, what are the challenges that we could go ahead with, and how can we imagine a new social, or if there is a need for an imagination of a renewed social for that matter. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Abdul. It's been a pleasure here and a big pleasure to be part of the symposium. In fact, we had some wonderful sessions in the morning, very different entry points to understand the social and the educational, but this is something which forces us to think. And I think that is the role of education in some senses, yes.
Yes, ma'am. So I would directly get to it, in a sense, get to the point where I would like to know how our founding fathers in sociology, like the classical sociologists, how would they look at this changing social, or what kind of ideas did they have for the social, and how can we use them to understand this changing social?
Yeah, that's a good entry point, but of course a caveat, because as somebody doing gender studies, we'd always say founding figures, though
yes.
there have been more fathers than mothers. But
Sorry.
that is part of the story. But you know what is interesting, Abdul, that when we do a BA degree in sociology, not that I did literature, and then I did an MA in sociology, these fundamental questions are not often addressed in a very overt fashion. So what happens is that you will say sociology is the study of web of relationship, or sociology is the study of the social. And we are happy with that definition, and we move forward and we say, okay, the functionalists define it this way, conflict defines it that way, etc. But I think your symposium is readdressing the question that is there a new social which the education ushers in, or what is the social? The point which I think Professor Sarukai addressed in the morning, that what is this social? Now, I've often thought about it, and I think what is very different in a modern period, in modernity, because when we talk about education, we're really talking of modern education. Education in any traditional pre-modern society was reproduction of existing knowledge. So you were taught to be, if you were a Brahmin, you're taught to be a better Brahmin. If you're born a Muslim, you're taught to be a better Muslim. If you are born a woman, you're taught to be a better woman. So you're basically informal education, or even sometimes formal, would be to recreate the existing roles and status, if you wish to use sociological terms. What changes with modernity is there is a self-conscious awareness. As a sociology teacher and student, we always begin that people always reflected upon the world, reflected upon the social. But what is different in the modern is that earlier it would be a theological or a metaphysical entry about the social, and also about what is good behavior, what is bad behavior, normative. What happens with modernity is that you say that this society, this social, is not divinely ordained. This social and all its problems, inequalities, discriminations, are socially constituted. And if it is socially constituted, human beings can change it because humans have created this. Therefore, education acquires a certain role of recasting or reformulating. So the role of modern education is that it breaks from that. And that is where I think we don't think of it often. And we decide often to begin on arbitrary points. So say discussions say at one point it was equity or equality, then it moves to quality or etc. This is within the more limited sphere. But in the larger frame, I think this is where the relationship of the education and the social changes. Socialization is also education, but education in the formal is reconstituting that.
So how would, let's say, someone like Marx look at it? And how would he say that this changing nature of the social, which is in a sense being brought about by the market, by the state, and even though certain normative concerns were being contested by modern education, but new forms of normative concerns are being pushed in as well, where new identities are being constructed or being negotiated with older identities. So yes.
So we are now 25 years into the 21st century. It's been a very, very long time since the founding figures of the social sciences. Durkheim was technically sociologist, as would Weber. Marx was not,
Yes.
more a journalist and activist. But we drove a lot from them. Morning we discussed Zimmel. Now, what concerned these scholars who were roughly in the 19th century, some passed away in the early 20th century, but primarily 19th century, was that they were dealing with the transformative changes which were taking place in Western Europe, primarily. And at one level, you can see them as people with very different orientations towards the social. And on another level, you can see them with very similar concerns. And I often give this example in my classroom that Marx uses the word alienation, Weber uses the word estrangement, Durkheim uses the word anomie, meaning they were basically at a point of time where everything was changing.
Yes.
All that is, frozen melts into the air. And very few people know it's a quote from Communist Manifesto, okay, because the postmoderns sort of appropriated it. So they were confronted with a society, everything was changing. Urbanization,
Yes,
industrialization, migration, breaking up of families, new questions of gender equality, working class movements. It's not the Western Europe which imagine now. London was a very dirty place. You had unplanned growth. You had the plague over there. You had people dying. You had bad sanitation. All of Charles Dickens' novels were written in that context. And they felt that something was moving. And how did you deal with it? Now, so there were people who were concerned with these very intense changes. So the question that so many centuries literally now, are they relevant to how they understood the social? Because there's a very strong opinion in the contemporary context that what do we do with them now? Firstly, they're Western, they're not part of our country. And second, they're ancient. What do they do? But one of the most powerful organizations of society, institutional structures of society, capitalism, is what they all engaged with and which continues today in new forms, neoliberalism, a new format. Maybe production is not so important, services, maybe the internet and electronic transmission has changed things. Maybe outsourcing has changed things. But the basic logic of a system which is constantly expanding and who is motivated by acquisition of profit. Because if you don't have profit, you die. It's like a shop. If you don't earn profit, you close shop. That's the motor. Now, the question that, yes, many things have changed. We need new ideas, but the core dynamics of profit maximization remain.
Clear.
So Trump comes to the US, there are stock markets, some strange things happen. Most of us don't understand. It's mystified. But we know that this is globally connected. We know there's tax issues, there are trade policies which govern our lives at the micro. Going back to your question, I deviated because I anticipated the question, is it relevant to discuss classical thinkers today? Now, I think the question that first they were confronted with great poverty, inequality, immiserization, and the death of certainty. Like you are not sure. We all want to believe in something which will take us through life, but modernity ushered in, like what Berger called the burden of choice. So it is deep, the angst was deep. So I think that motivated all of them, that how to study the social is a question which Marx sort of addressed fully. And he addressed it in the sense, in his entire debate with idealist thinkers in German ideology, he's saying, don't begin with the notions you have about society. Don't begin with the ideas that you have about A or B or C, family or religion or economy or trade or whatever. Begin with as it exists. How do you study society? It's an empirical and a theoretical question. So he says, don't begin with the consciousness that you have of any phenomena, but try and get rid of it. And interestingly, Durkheim, whom we usually pose as antithetical to Marx, he says the same in the Rules of Sociological Method, get rid of preconceptions. And he has this absolutely brilliant writing where he says, human beings did not wait for sociology to define family, religion, kinship.
Yes.
They already had ideas. So we are studying, to go back to Weber, a meaningful social life. In the morning symposia, you had a lot of discussion on language. That language, in fact, epitomizes or sort of, in a certain sense, captures the social. So Marx's understanding is you begin with, and that's why he introduced this idea of the ontology, if you wish to say, about human beings, that human beings are laboring, they produce tools, and they reproduce. So at one hand, they produce tools, so you have to produce a particular fishing rod to fish. That's the instrument of production. You have to engage with others in order to do that. So you cooperate. There's a social organization. And most importantly, where it differs from Durkheim, Durkheim talks about division of labor correctly because you're over-specialization, etc. Marx has this interesting section in German ideology where he says division of labor is also division of property. So in the constitution of the social, as sociologists, and if you look at the classical thinkers, any of them, Weber, Marx, Durkheim, Simmel, then we're talking of a phenomena which is not abstract. And the question philosophers raise about the individual and society and what do you define is, in a certain sense, a no question for sociologists. Sociology textbooks begin with this character, Wolfchild. You remember? And this little baby was taken up by the wolves and brought up by the wolves. When the human beings found that baby, they brought the wolf child back, but the wolf child was not used to eating cooked food. The wolf child did not know how to stand on legs. The crawled. Wolf child found it impossible and finally died. Wolf child had no language. Now, was the wolf child an individual? The wolf child was not a human, because the individual is socially constituted.
Yes.
So, the chicken and the egg question, which comes first, is that it's simultaneous. And that's why we, in the early years in JNU, when we taught the Thinkers Part 2, which was later dropped, one of the texts was Herbert Mead, Mind, Self and Society. So, maybe I've spoken too much. It's the hazards of teachers.
No. Yes.
So in Mind, Self and Society, what Mead is trying to do, it's a combination of the dialectics of Marx and the idea of social psychology. So he's basically saying that it's not in any chronology that first you have self, then you have society, then you have mind. He says all of them work together.
Yes.
It's simultaneous, okay? So if a child, Durkheim says the same in the rules, the child, baby, you just have a little baby girl. When you have a baby, they come home, They cry any time of the day and night. They go to sleep in the middle of the day. They decide to play in the middle of the night. Okay. And this is what Durkheim says. So you have to teach the baby when to sleep, how to sleep, when to be hungry, and when not to be hungry. Night is to sleep, and over a few months, the child learns. Like the child learns that you can only be hungry at these fixed time, not all the time.
She learns about time.
She learns about time, she learns about managing hunger, managing sleep, and which means that this individual is already constituted by the social, learns to speak, learns to say hot, cold, hungry, not hungry, learns to express pleasure. So it's also meaningful. So Mead gives the example of dogs fighting. So he gives this extraordinary vivid imagery that you know how dogs are, they start, one will sort of bark, the other one will bark, then they will act as though they're about to attack and the other one will be there, etc. So they're having a dog fight and they have a particular bodily movements in order to anticipate what will happen. Now he says that what is different among humans, that we don't have to actually do all that. We can just show a knife and the message is there that, so what is the knife? It's a symbol. It's a language. Okay. So sociology, I've discovered at the tail end of my life is a fascinating subject because a lot of these issues are empirical in a certain sense, So we look at the historicity of how the individual is constituted. So we do not see them at different parts. There cannot be any social, obviously, without individual members, which Professor Sarukai said. But there can be no individual without the social.
Yes.
It's impossible, So, that individual is only a product of the social. But of course, to go back to Marx since you began, that the individual has agency, makes choices, but we make history on our own, but not as we wish to.
Yes.
The constraints are there. So education is like that. We can only do that much.
Yes. In a way, what you are doing with your blog, that you are a co-founder of Doing Sociology.
Yeah.
Do you find that space there where you could, in a way, come to define or come to understand the changes which are happening, and then maybe define an alternative path or alternate space for people to express
You'd
opinions?
be interested, Abdul, to know that this is completely voluntary.
Oh.
There is no money. And people ask, where is the office? Well, there are just 3 human beings and 3 laptops. That's all.
Oh.
And we began in COVID. We were quite bored and we didn't know what to do. And the world was changing. JNU was in a bad shape. And we were sitting in our room and they were about to submit their PhD. And they said, young people want a space to write and express. That was, as young people, Dipali and Rituparna's suggestion. I, as a teacher, wanted an alternative space for e-learning. Can you have a space where you can have good material? Because we have, as you know, in education, very uneven. You have top of the league scholars doing fabulous work, global scholars, and you have pathetic pedagogic practice and textbooks and guidebooks.
Yes.
Kunjis,
Yes.
And we found, that's why some of these technologies are double-edged, that this could be powerful. So I remember this person teaching in some place in Kaziranga, and at the COVID time, they started using the telephone to teach, the mobile phone. They could go text, and they would use text from Doing Sociology. Okay. Or have interviews. Say, in media, we interviewed Arvind Rajgopal, we interviewed people on populism, we got the best people globally to do it. Where will you get that access? So we saw it was completely possible to do it. It is accessible. What is the limitation? The limitation is that we have a very crowded public sphere. We have, like media, even the internet, it's very crowded. So you have, everybody's there. Kumbh Mela is happening, somebody is dying, somebody is running away with somebody's having a divorce. The news is imploding. Attention is going down. People are not interested to look in. So you have summary of summaries now. Reels of reels, yes. That's one challenge. Other challenge of this overcrowding is you are having insular groups. Education in modern societies was supposed to be public. So we used to use the word public in the sense like common schools, which we discussed, open to everybody, equality, freedom to explore, fraternity, that you're engaging with people who diverse from your family or religious backgrounds. Today, what is happening with the internet, you felt everything will become global, but today we have what is I call narrowcasting. Instead of broadcasting, you have narrowcasting. So the WhatsApp message you get will not be the WhatsApp message your neighbor gets in Kolkata.
Yes.
Okay, so they will never see the WhatsApp message you get. And you will never see the WhatsApp message they get. Where is a public when there is nothing which binds you? Okay, so the same phenomena, so you may have a riot, or you have a workers' protest, or you have a farmers' strike. Depending upon where your identity is, you will get information which is literally fed to you on narrowcasting. It will pop up with an algorithm because you have seen like-minded programs before. So you will only see what you already believe in.
Yes.
Like the pre-modern education. It will reaffirm what you believe. If you felt Hindus are very bad, you will get programs which reaffirm that. If you feel Muslims are very bad, you will get exactly reaffirm those. And you will never see an alternative. Okay, so this is the most frightening part of today's world, where you wish to make a difference, but you are making it within a very complex structure which is controlling you. And as a person working on media, we recognize state censorship, like emergency and Indira Gandhi, and you know that newspapers had blank spaces, and you know this is censor. Market censorship is extremely sophisticated. You cannot catch them. How will you blame anybody if you're only watching the same WhatsApp? You say it just came up.
Yes. You're part of these many groups and...
Yeah, part of this. And no, plus it's algorithm. If you watch something, only those will come back. So the idea of reaching out to a wider world, and that's happening globally, like in the US or Europe, racist groups, depending upon whether you think you're a victim or whether you think you're not, you will only get those feeds. So it's a tricky thing. That's why I feel the classical thinkers are still relevant, because some of this profit maximization remains, inequality remains. What is new is the technology has reconstituted the social.
Okay.
And education, therefore, has to very imaginatively use the technology. So supposing we're doing this podcast, okay, you will have your friends and relatives will watch it.
Yes.
How do you manage to reach out to somebody else? That is the question. Can you break into groups which are not willing to listen to this, And I think as the next generation, we are done with now.
No, we have still so much to learn from you.
Yeah,
and it's something we also discuss within our university. How do you reach the people we don't reach to? In the sense, how do we reach the people we don't talk to? And one of the ways we have been thinking is that how to create situations of dialogue or spaces of dialogue. And maybe doing sociology is a wonderful space to do that.
You could think about having a discussion on this.
Yes.
Aman Madan had a wonderful presentation in the recently concluded ISS, where he talked about how do you educate people to deal with prejudices, stereotypes. It's important. How do you challenge it? And Professor Satish Deshpande is here, and we were working on the NCERT textbooks, and we were talking about, people have ideas. A strong state is somebody who is, a state should be strong. There shouldn't be too many divisions. It will weaken a society, that kind of ideas. There should be one language, or there should be one this or the other. And we gave the example of Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. Now, in the case of Sri Lanka, it was one of the fastest growing economy.
Yes.
Until the time when they declared Sinhalese to be the only language and Buddhism to be the state religion. And then you had, 40 years of civil war, and still in a process of recovery or not. Like, it just destroyed the fabric. So actually, a strong state became a very, very weak society. And Bangladesh had the first movement for was language, just the right to speak and educate in Bangla, nothing else. It was not for breaking out. But the state came down very heavily, strong state, broke the country, and that would be a lesson for us. So the more you take people along, the stronger, like a family.
Yes.
Your son will run away if you are too harsh. But if you bring them in, then, it will stay.
Yes. Yeah. So we will go towards my final question. And what can we, in educational research, take from sociology? And what could be our future, in a sense, what could be our future research endeavors where we could use sociological theories, thinkers, to understand the social and also engage with the problems that we have been, in a sense, struggling with?
I think sociology of education has already led the way. And I think in the morning when Professor Geeta Nambi-san was talking, that initially they were interested more in the quantitative enrollment, dropout rate, even when they were talking about marginalized groups like the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe. And they did not look into so much the qualitative, the narratives, the experiential, which is one way of looking at it. But the other thing, which, I could be wrong, is to link the macro with the micro. So you have the state. So I think all of us have to have some clarity on what the state is. How do we define the state? How do we understand its operation? How do we understand the market? Okay, and what is the relationship between the state and the market? And what is the relationship between a global market and your classroom? So the macro and the micro. So usually we say in sociology, the sociology has a bird's eye view and anthropology has a worm's eye view, from the bottom and the top. So I feel increasingly that for education, that's like I said, I'm not trained as a sociology of education person. It was more hands-on experience teaching, and I got interested in school textbooks and that kind of thing. The macro-micro has to be looked at simultaneously. So when you're talking about classroom, don't forget that the classroom is constitutive of a larger economics, politics, culture system. And when you talk about the larger, remember the larger is reproduced through these multiple sites. And one person I discovered very late, but I'm just so impressed, Dorothy Smith, whose work on everyday life as a problematic, draws from two very distinct traditions, is I think very productive. So on one hand, she draws from Marx and the question of political economy and the idea of social relations of production and reproduction. She's also a feminist, so the nature of a feminist experience, and interestingly, ethno-methodology. How do people relate to each other? How do they act out? Okay, and this is this absolutely wonderful book, The Everyday World is a Problematic. It's available on the net. For some reason, she did not become very famous globally. Like everybody in the world knows Judith Butler, sorry, but everybody doesn't know her. But she's absolutely incredible because she's given directions of, how these very macro, the micro, and the macro, micro, none of these should be taken as givens. When we say constitutive of relations, she uses the word relations of ruling. So when we say state, it's not an object like the mic. Even the mic is a relation, it's made out of constituent parts. Like that, the state is also made out of constituent. We have to understand that making and not see it as wahan pe state hai or this is the market. But that's my favorite thing. I'm not going to speak more on it. I'll be touching on it later, yeah. But I think this would be a good way. But I think people in education have done fabulous work, pedagogic work, the kind of work bringing in the classroom, bringing in the experiences. And there's a whole body of scholarship in that field. Many of us have just followed route. We are interlopers. We are really not, there, yeah.
Yes, interlopers.
Yeah.
So there's so much to ask you, and definitely this has been very enriching and a wonderful exercise. Thank you, ma'am. And
Thank you for this opportunity. Ever
and
since I retired, I'm always dying to speak, because
and
classroom is
yes,
not there.
I know. I remember our very first experience, which in a way was constitutive of the identity I get when I came in for my MPhil Viva, and you had passed me a glass of water. That was more than enough for me to gain some kind of confidence within myself. So in a way, what you're saying, that how relationships are built and how we cannot treat any individual or any institution as a object in itself, and it is constituted by relations. So maybe we can look at that and
Yeah.
go forward with it. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Abdul. Thank you for the
you.
university to give this opportunity. Thank you.